From the kind of in-depth interviews it's increasingly hard to find, to political reporting that's meticulously balanced and lets you hear from the elected officials in their own words, to short programs that mix civics education with the beauty of Washington, TVW's produced programs offer a unique viewing experience. Inside Olympia, a weekly interview program hosted by Austin Jenkins, is TVW's longest-running produced show, focusing on depth rather than sound bites. TVW's weekly political news show, The Impact, focuses on decisions at the state capitol and how those decisions impact people around the state. When lawmakers gather in Olympia for legislative sessions, Legislative Review provides daily and weekly highlights of the top bills, issues, and debates at the Capitol. TVW's legal program, The Decision, takes you behind the scenes on interesting and controversial decisions handed down by the Washington Supreme Court. Field Report is specifically designed to cover what state government does on the ground, outside the Capitol, and across Washington. Washington Road Trip takes viewers to all corners of our state, offering video tours of every one of Washington's 49 legislative districts. My Favorite Places with Ralph Monroe offers educational and historical tidbits about unique places throughout the Evergreen State. Finally, Historic Washington shows fascinating video glimpses of Washington's past. TVW, carried statewide on cable TV and streaming live at tvw.org.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 45th Murrow Symposium. I'm Corey Wilder, the chairperson of the Murrow Symposium Committee. I am delighted to be with you today and to have the chance to introduce our esteemed guest and session speaker, Renee Radcliff Sinclair. Renee is president and CEO of TVW, Washington's national award-winning public affairs media network. Prior to joining TVW, Renee spent 14 years as a journalist, followed by 4 successful elections to the Washington State House of Representatives. Renee has served in policy leadership roles with the American Electronics Association, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Apple. She's a regularly featured speaker at national and international events and has published numerous policy options in local, regional, and national publications. Additionally, she shares her award-winning expertise as a volunteer through a number of policy-related, community-based activities. Now I'm going to turn it over to Renee. Let's all give her a warm welcome.
Thanks, Corey, for that very nice introduction, and good morning. I always enjoy meeting with student groups, and I just really wish we were together in person, but I'm really glad that you got an opportunity to see that short video about TVW because it really explains a lot about what we do, and that's probably the most you're going to hear about TVW during my entire presentation. So many of you will go on to become journalists, and some of you may even land at TVW one day. We have a lot of WSU grads, and we love the students that we get from WSU, both as employees and as interns. So I encourage you to check into that. So some of you may land here, some of you may become teachers, some of you will become renowned novelists, and many of you will become corporate communications people. And in that role, you will probably support the work of government affairs professionals. And in fact, many of you will become lobbyists or possibly even run for elected office yourselves, because that's what really good communicators do. They communicate. So this morning, I wanted to share with you a window into a couple of life-changing events for me. And I know now you're thinking, oh man, not another one of those speeches. But I encourage you to hang with me because there really is a point. In fact, there are 6 points. So just think of this little talk as 6 things I learned on my summer vacation and why some of them matter to you. In order for you to understand my story, I need you to take a journey with me. When I was 6 years old, okay, I didn't say this was going to be a short journey, but when I was 6 years old, a couple of things happened that changed my life forever. My oldest sister, who was entering her junior year of college, wanted to go to Washington, D.C. for her last 2 years. Truth be told, she was chasing a man, and my parents did not approve of the man or of my sister chasing him. We lived in Oregon, about 1,000,000 miles from Washington, D.C., or at least it seemed that way at the time. But ultimately, she was an adult and she had saved the money to do this, and there wasn't a lot my folks could say about it. So they made it clear if she went back to Washington, D.C., she wouldn't be able to come home until she was done. It was a 2-year commitment, and my family is really close. So my sister's decision to go so far away was tough on all of us. And I'll never forget the day the whole family, 5 kids, 2 parents, and a good sized dog, loaded into the car to drive to the Greyhound bus station and bid my sister farewell. She might as well have been traveling to Siberia for all I knew. The whole family was in tears, and I'll never forget watching her face through the bus window and waving goodbye as the bus pulled away from the station. So that was in early September. Fast forward a couple of months to November, and we were preparing for Thanksgiving at our house. Everyone was coming the next day. My mom's family, she's one of 5 kids, so a lot of aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, it was going to be big. And that night over dinner, the night before Thanksgiving, we were celebrating my oldest brother's 18th birthday, which was actually the next day as well. And my mom mentioned that she'd forgotten something at the grocery store that she really needed, and my brother volunteered to run to the store to get it for her. He got to the store, he got what she needed and was heading home and was hit by a drunk driver and immediately killed. And my sister couldn't get home. So for the rest of that year, my parents scrimped and saved, and in the spring, they rented the ugliest turquoise blue 9-passenger station wagon that you can possibly imagine. The only good thing about this car was that we never lost it in a parking lot. And they loaded up the 3 remaining kids who were still living at home, both sets of immigrant grandparents, and off we went to Washington, D.C. I was 6 years old. I turned 7 on this trip, actually, and my oldest grandfather was 86. So here's lesson number 1. I learned a lot about tolerance, and it was quite an adventure. We took 3 weeks for the trip east so we could sightsee along the way. And then we spent a month in Washington, D.C., and 2 weeks for the trip home. There was still a lot of serious sightseeing going on there. And my dad, in order to make this trip happen and to write it off our taxes, arranged to do his professional development classwork in Washington, D.C. that year. And he also agreed to do a little bit of lobbying for his professional organization while we were there. And my mother, because this was going to be a life-changing trip, insisted that we all keep a journal of our adventure. So my brother, who was 14, very diligently wrote about every girl he encountered along the way. And my sister, who was 10, documented every animal from prairie dogs to bears that were sighted along the road. And I was diligently listening to the adult conversation, pulling out sound bites, and creating entire stories around them. Later, my mother would read these stories to the whole car, who would erupt in fits of laughter. And this, my dear young friends, was the birth of fake news. But through that experience, I learned lesson number 2. I really love to write. I couldn't spell. I was 6, but I loved to write. And I learned the ability to communicate in all its forms is incredibly powerful. Eventually, that would lead to a career in journalism. So thanks, Mom. Eventually, we got to Washington, D.C. We rented rooms in my sister's dormitory because, after all, we were on a budget. My dad went to school every morning, and as one does in DC, the rest of the family spent a lot of time sightseeing, which was an amazing adventure for our family. The very first full day we were there, we went to the US Capitol, and I'll never forget sitting in the Senate gallery. I was fascinated that everyone was getting a chance to speak. As the youngest of 5 kids, I often felt like my voice didn't matter. And it was amazing to watch everyone on the Senate floor get their turn to tell their stories. So when my family got up to leave, I was so enamored with what was going on below me that I didn't even realize they had left. Someone finally realized I was no longer with them, and my brother came back to get me. But my dad really noticed. And in an effort to honor my interest, he ended up taking me on every lobbying visit he made after that. And every day they were in session, we would always spend a little time in the House or Senate gallery. Lesson number 3. I learned that my dad and I shared a love of history and the legislative process. That was a wonderful gift to me that he and I shared until the day he passed away, and eventually led to a career in politics. So thanks, Dad. Trust me, eventually we're going to get to the stuff that matters to you. Really, we will. While we were there, we spent many nights sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, listening to music and watching some very impressive fireworks displays. In those days, the military bands used to assemble on pontoons on the reflecting pools of the Capitol Mall. And there on those steps, my 2 immigrant grandmothers taught me to sing "God Bless America." And while that's really cute on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, it was less cute when I sang it over and over and over again in the ugly turquoise station wagon all the way home. Remember, lesson number 1 was about tolerance? This is really what that was about. As I noted, my dad took me with him every afternoon as we met with members of Congress and representatives from Health and Human Services. And we always spent a little time just watching. Sometimes it was House or Senate floor activity. Sometimes it was a committee hearing. In those days, you could just walk in and listen. And sometimes it was just people interacting in hallways. But we spent a lot of time watching and listening. And here's lesson number 4. And now we're getting to the good stuff. So listen up. Always be willing to meet with anyone. We knew no one, seriously, no one, when we got to Capitol Hill. But my dad was fearless. He had a story to tell, and he told it really well, or at least it sounded that way to my 6-year-old ears. He could tell that story quickly with just enough personal interest and humor to keep people connected to what he was saying. I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, but my dad was a master storyteller. And that brings us to lesson number 5. I learned that when you show up with valid information and passion and a compelling story, people will listen, and then you can change things. I watched my dad do it every single day. People, important people, listen when you show up with valid information and passion for the work you do. So show up. But possibly even more important than showing up for them, invite elected leaders at all levels to show up for you. Invite them to your workplace, show them what you do, help them gain a better understanding of your interest and your industry. Talk with them about your ongoing needs, and I know you have them. Believe it or not, when I was in the legislature, I once walked into a community college classroom only to see a beautiful grand piano being pelted by rain. So I live on the wet side of the state, full disclosure. The students who were giving me this tour were very accomplished musicians, and they shared the story of this beautiful piano and how it was being abused in this way because they had been unable to get the legislature to authorize funding for a new music building on their campus. And in fact, they weren't even on a list anywhere. So those kids took some pictures for me, and I started carrying those photos of that piano everywhere I went, showing them to every legislator, lobbyist, and staff person I spoke with. And long story short, we got the funding that year, all because someone asked me to show up for them. It works. Have the courage to ask. Give elected leaders an opportunity to show up for you. Believe me, they want to do it. And then when you're meeting with them, be honest. The purpose of meeting with them is to build trust. and a relationship that will last a lifetime and serve you well for that lifetime. It was Edward R. Murrow, I'm sure you've heard of him, who once said, "To be persuasive, we must be believable. To be believable, we must be credible. To be credible, we must be truthful." And he was right. Treat everyone with honesty, truthfulness, kindness, dignity, and respect. I cannot tell you how many professional lobbyists I've seen treat legislative assistants like something they wanted to scrape from the bottom of their shoe. These are the people who get you appointments when you need them. These are the people who get your phone messages through. These are important people to the people they work for. Treat them with respect. And I encourage you, as you're crafting your messages, to think in positive terms. I know we've all probably played the game, don't think about an elephant. Well, there are many ways to get people to think about the things you want them to think about, but do so in a positive way. You're probably all too young to remember when George H.W. Bush said, "No new taxes." After that statement, all anybody could think about was new taxes. What if he had said something like, "Let's think about creative ways to build the funding that we need for the future"? That opens up a whole world of opportunity and doesn't shut down one option. The other thing I encourage you to do is think about the words you're using. In the legislative and government arena across the board at all levels, we love to talk about infrastructure. Well, when I think about infrastructure, I think about roads and bridges. When you think about infrastructure, you may be thinking about energy generation and transmission, or you may be thinking about water and how to store water appropriately. And if you want someone to walk with you down a pathway, they have to be seeing the same pictures in their heads that you're seeing in yours. So the ability to be absolutely explicit with the words you choose is very important in this arena. I also encourage you to cultivate unlikely champions. When I first entered the legislature, the House was horribly lopsided. There were 66 Democrats and 32 Republicans. The next election cycle, that flipped almost exactly, and there were 63 Republicans and 35 Democrats. There were an awful lot of Republicans that nobody had talked to for years. And when they got the majority, they remembered that. You don't want to shut anybody out. And the other reason that you want to cultivate unlikely champions is eventually they're going to go behind closed doors and you're not going to be able to go there with them. And you want a friend behind each one of those doors who can tell your story as well as you tell it. Well, they'll never be as good as you, but you want them to be armed with the information that you've provided, both the facts and the figures and the personal stories that will grab people's hearts. And then I encourage you to listen very carefully when you're meeting with folks. They will tell you things that you never thought to ask, like, what does the Speaker of the House think about your bill? Or who's on the fence that you need to go see? And possibly even what their issue of concern is, so that you can be prepared when you go to meet with those folks. Listening is as big a part of this arena as talking. And finally, it's important to maintain realistic expectations. I used to live in Snohomish County, and when we first moved there in 1988, I got involved in a transportation project. I was pregnant with my son, and this was a very important project to me. It was the road to our house, and there was an accident there every single day, and quite often they were fatality accidents. So I got involved in a community effort to fix this problem, and that was in 1988. In 1993, we determined that we needed to get somebody elected if we were going to get the funding for this project moved forward. I ran, got elected. 6 years later in 2000, the project was funded and it was completed in 2006. In the same amount of time, I raised a son and sent him off to the Navy. Sometimes this stuff takes time and you've got to be willing to go the distance with it. So, lesson number 6, and this is the most important one. While watching my dad navigate a system he really knew nothing about, I learned that I really may not be able to change the world, but if I show up with valid information and passion, I can impact my little corner of it up here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And if every single one of us is changing our little corner, well then collectively, we're going to have a major impact on our country and on our world. In closing, and I really am seriously almost done, and I hope you have questions because I've really just touched on lobbying and elected office here, but in closing, I want to remind you of a quote from Margaret Mead that I am certain you have all heard and possibly even memorized. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." You have the entire world in front of you. If you can show up with honesty, passion, tolerance, and kindness, your voice will be heard. Thank you for the profound impact you are making and are going to make on your corner of the world and our shared future. Carry on. So Corey, I hope we have some questions.
We have a couple of questions. The first one here is, what effect do you feel social media has had on telling the stories we want to tell in the way we want others to hear?
So social media was designed to be the wonderful communication tool that was going to bring us all closer together and remove the tribal boundaries that we've created for ourselves. In fact, it has done just the opposite. The ability for false information to travel at the speed of light has really increased the power of groups that are designed to drive wedges between people. And that's a challenging time for us. Social media used appropriately is a wonderful tool. If you'll indulge me just a little bit, I like to tell stories. You probably figured that out. When I was a kid growing up, everybody in our community got the same newspaper at 3:30 in the afternoon. We all read the same newspaper. We all sat down at 5 o'clock to watch a half hour of local news and then an hour of national news, and we were all consuming the same information. That created a shared experience that we could all talk about over the back fence as we were doing our Sunday yard work. That scenario is very different now. And I think social media is a wonderful tool. TVW uses it very effectively, but it's also a tool that is used inappropriately. And I just encourage you to be very thoughtful about the things you choose to share on social media. It's a wonderful communication tool if it's used appropriately.
Thank you so much, Renee. That's great. I have one more question that I see, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat here just to make sure I'm not missing anything. I have one more question here. You said the ability to communicate in all its forms is powerful. Can you share a time where this really rang true for you, like where all the stars came into alignment? And
I've that truth has been such a part of my life throughout my life. I learned it first watching my dad use his ability to communicate. And then watching my grandmothers, who couldn't even speak each other's languages, teach me to sing a song in English. I grew up, went to college, was planning to go to medical school, got a degree in anatomy and physiology, and discovered during the course of that experience that my ability to communicate to families was more important, not more important, but just as important as the science of what I was learning to do. So I think communication has always been a big part of my life. And I think that learning has followed me all along. I started my career in print journalism, where of course the ability to write was the most important thing for me, and the ability to write concisely within a certain structure of space became incredibly important. And now I spend a lot of time trying to help folks be more concise in their writing. And so I think it's always been a part of my life. When I got involved in politics, the ability to deliver a message in person became incredibly important. When you're out doorbelling and meeting people at their front door, the ability to communicate quickly is really important. And so school and the ability to go to college is a wonderful thing. And if while you are there, the thing you learn is the ability to communicate across mediums, you can do anything. You really can. You can do anything. So important. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer as well. I hope a lot of my students are on right now hearing your answer to that question. We have a few more. They're coming in fast and furious now.
Great.
For someone who is about to enter the industry, how would you recommend getting into a career in political journalism?
Well, clearly I did it all wrong. I went to school for a science, but I had a scholarship. So take all the communication courses you can. If you're in the Murrow College program, you're already doing all the right things. As I mentioned, we have a lot of employees here at TVW who are graduates of the Murrow College, and they are amazingly well-informed, strong employees. So you're on the right pathway. I don't know if schools do student newspapers anymore, but when I was in school, that was a big thing. And I learned an awful lot by participating with my school newspaper. And in fact, in high school, I was editor of my school newspaper. So take classes related to writing, to public speaking. Social media is with us to stay, so learn how to use it appropriately. Do anything you can that will help you be a stronger communicator, because as we just discussed, there's power in that.
For sure. Thank you. I'm going to keep moving on to make sure we can get to everybody today. We have a question that came in asking, can you also share a challenge or a failure in your career and how you got over that?
Oh, that's a great one. So I love to work, and sometimes I work a little too much. And before I came to TVW, I was working for Apple, as you heard in my intro. And I loved the work that I was doing for Apple. I was working on education policy, specifically as it relates to technology. So I was lobbying and working with really smart people to develop new ideas around technology and education. I was hired to cover 2 states, Washington and Colorado, and I thought that was great. Before I knew it, I had 14 states, including California, which is like 4 states in one. And I found myself on the road all the time, and I burned out. And I remember one night, I got home about midnight on a Friday night, and it was midnight on Saturday night, and I was packing my bags to leave at 6 a.m. the next morning. And I remember sitting down on the bed and just thinking, I do not want to be doing this a year from now. Even though I loved the work that I was doing, I just knew I couldn't do it. And I think my inability to recognize that maybe I was saying yes a little too often ultimately damaged my ability to do that job really well. And at the same time, I was involved in a project in Snohomish County. You may remember that 6 years ago right now, there was a deadly landslide. It was the SR 530 landslide. It was known more commonly as the Oso landslide. The governor had appointed me to a commission to look at the response to that. And I really wanted to give that more time than I was able to give it because I was traveling all the time, and my mom was dying at the same time. And I just eventually said, I've had enough. I'm going to take a few months off. And it was probably the best thing I could have done because that's when I found TVW. I was looking for someone. And I'm grateful for that time now. But I think if I had learned to say no a little better earlier on, I would have handled that situation better.
Yeah, wow. I was just thinking, it feels like the Oso landslide just happened, just.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 6 years.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, thank you for sharing that story. The next question I have for you is, when speaking with someone, especially someone who may not agree with you, you mentioned it's important to listen and to stay positive. But are there situations you've faced where it's really obvious the other person is refusing to listen or using bad faith arguments to shut you down? And in that kind of a situation, what do you do?
Oh, that happens all the time. When you're trying to have a conversation and it immediately devolves into sort of name calling rather than talking about the merits of an issue, you're in trouble. But one of the things that I learned during the course of that SR 530 landslide commission is the importance of listening to really hear, not to respond, and to truly understand where another person is coming from. One of the things I learned when I was in the legislature is we all agree on some things. And if you can start a conversation around the things that you agree on and sort of set the table with those things that we all want to achieve, then it's a little easier to start chewing away at the things about which you don't agree. And when you are working to come to a place of solution, you really have to listen to people to know where they're coming from. And when you actually understand why they think the way they do, it's easier to come to a resolution. Now, it takes two people to do that. It really does. And it's fascinating to me and this happens on social media all the time. You'll get embroiled in a political conversation on social media, and when people run out of real things to say about it, they'll start calling you names. There's no point in that. Walk away from that. It's not going to serve you well, especially on social media, to be in a conversation like that. And the thing that I have tried to help my kids understand is when you're in one of those conversations with someone in person, model the kind of behavior you want them to exhibit. People will rise to the occasion. I'm surprised at how they do. But if we can stay true to ourselves and model the kind of behavior we want to see in return, sometimes that can really work.
That is incredible advice. Listen to hear, not to respond, right? I think that a lot of these conflicts come about because people don't feel heard. So that's a wonderful, piece of advice. Thank you. We have one more question here. There is a lot of negative rhetoric surrounding journalism, fake news, and things like that. Would you say this would be an obstacle for those who try to switch from journalism to politics, especially since politics is heavily dependent on public opinion?
So when I made the decision to run for office, and truly it came out of my role as a journalist in my community, I was writing op-eds about state government and people started saying, hey, you should run. But I had to leave that job when I made the decision to actually run for office. It would not have been appropriate for me to stay in the role of an editor when I was seeking office. And there is a lot of negative news around both professions right now. And I remember when I decided to run for office and I told my dad, he said to me, well, do you consider that a step up or a step down from being a journalist? So, so this is not particularly new. And it's not that he thought being a politician was bad. He just wanted me to really think about it and know why I was doing what I was doing. Um, there is a lot of really harsh news around being a journalist right now. And the only thing I can say is the way we rebuild our reputation is by really taking the time to do the job right. Earlier in my presentation, I made a comment about choosing our words carefully. There are a lot of words that are really packed with emotion that journalists use all the time. And I don't even think they realize that they're triggering things in people that are causing them deep emotion. The one that comes immediately to mind for me is the word tax loopholes. Well, I can appreciate that it's a way for some organizations to step outside tax policy. But at some point, somebody created that mechanism. So is it really a loophole if it was designed to work that way? And now, yet that word makes us all feel something. So I think journalists and good journalists do this every single day. They think about the words they're using and the impact those words are going to have on people. And I'm just going to say it right now, there are a lot of 24-hour news channels that are not at all about news. They're about keeping people stirred up and angry on one side of the ledger or the other, and they're delivering an audience to their advertisers. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but let's be honest about what it is. It's entertainment, and it's feeding a point of view that the viewer already has. It's not news. Let's not call it news. Let's be honest about what it is. Good journalists will rebuild our industry.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with everybody. I have one question, and then we'll get into whatever your final remarks, whatever we've missed, we want to make sure that we hear from you. This is related to career as well. What are some interviewing tips you have for summer internships or jobs with news stations? What can we tell our students?
Boy, that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, TVW is going to be hiring interns this summer and for the next legislative session. I think we've got summer handled, but interview tips. Show up on time, pay attention, tell the truth, listen, ask good questions while you're there, and come with questions in mind. Make sure that you get a tour of the facility if you want to work there. Do a lot of research ahead of time so you know who the players are at that station or at that newspaper. And don't be afraid to ask. I think internships are growing right now, which is great. And don't be afraid to reach out and to an organization you want to get some experience with. A lot of times internships turn into full-time gigs, and so don't be afraid to reach out.
Sage advice. I hope everybody is taking notes right now for summer internships at TVW. So everybody you'll be getting a lot of LinkedIn requests after this session, I'm
Great.
sure.
And I'm happy for that. And I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about TVW because I don't want to just be a commercial for us, but we are so amazingly awesome. You saw in the clip that started this session a lot about the work we do. We are Washington State's gavel to gavel producer of state government activities. We cover all three branches of government, the legislature, the Supreme Court, and activities out of the executive office, state agency boards and commissions, all of that sort of thing. But the really fun, creative work we do is around our produced shows. And we do 6 regularly produced shows and usually 1 or 2 documentaries a year. And I've never worked anywhere where it was so much fun to come in every day because everybody here is really focused on our mission and the work we do and doing it well. And you would be a great addition to our team, every single one of you. So don't be afraid to reach out.
When you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. I totally agree. It sounds like a wonderful culture.
Yeah, it's all fun.
100%. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything that you want to share with us that hasn't been asked?
Good question. I think we covered a lot of it. I just really encourage you all, and I sort of started my comments with this. When you are a strong communicator, there are a number of opportunities out there for you to use those skills across the board in a variety of different industries. Don't be afraid to explore those. And internships are a great way to do that. So if you want to work in corporate America, take your skill set there. If you want to be a journalist, and believe me, I respect journalists. They've got a tough job and they work 24 hours a day. But if that's what you want to do, take those skills into that arena and make our industry proud. Edward R. Murrow was absolutely one of the world's very best. What an amazing example for you. Take that into whatever industry you choose to place yourself. Take that ethic with you. What a wonderful opportunity you have.
Thank you so much. So we've just heard from Renee Radcliff Sinclair from TVW, and I would recommend that everybody who's here today take a look at Renee's speaker profile, and also please go to the sponsor section and take a look at TVW's profile as well, so you can learn a little bit more about the organization and the wonderful place within which Renee works. Thank you so much for being here today. We cannot thank you enough. It was a wonderful conversation filled with incredible advice.